Welcome back to Cinema Recaps. Today, I will introduce you to a crime thriller film from 2005 titled Revolver. Spoilers ahead, so be careful and pay attention. After 7 years of imprisonment, Cockney gambler Jake Green is finally freed. 2 years after his release, he and his brother Billy visit one of the most important casinos in the area with the intention of reclaiming the money they are owed by the casino owner, crime boss Dorothy Matcha. Despite the advice of his bodyguard Paul, Matcha allows Jake to join his private game. On the way up, Jake hesitates to take the elevator due to his claustrophobia, but the other bodyguards remind him they would have to climb 20 floors, so he reluctantly takes the elevator, trying to control his panic attack. Jake's first bet is a chip toss against another player at the table, and he loses, but it's on purpose. He's making Matcha feel a false sense of security, so when he bets with him again, Jake wins this time. Billy and Jake hurriedly leave the casino with bags full of money, but on their way out, they are stopped by Zach, who tells them they are in danger and he can help them, then hands Jake his business card. This time, Jake decides to take the stairs, but before he can step down even one step, he passes out and falls down the stairs. On the business card was the message, "Take the elevator." Jake is rushed to the hospital. Matcha anxiously tells Paul that Jake surely wants bigger revenge after 7 years in prison, especially after the incident with his sister-in-law. So, Matcha orders Paul to hire the best hitman in the business to deal with Jake at the hospital. Jake is informed that no clear cause for his fainting has been found, so he should go home and rest while waiting for the blood test results. Billy goes home while Jake takes the bodyguards for protection. However, all the bodyguards are shot as soon as they arrive. Jake narrowly escapes death because he finds a card on the floor that says, "Pick this up," so he bends down to do so. He tries to escape in a car, but the driver is also shot. Luckily, Zach arrives just in time to save him and take him away. The hitman, Sorter, can't understand why he missed, as he had never missed before, and speculates that someone must have tipped Jake off. But when Matcha scolds him, Sorter says he missed because he had a bad feeling. Meanwhile, Zach takes Jake to meet his partner, Avi, who has Jake's medical records in hand. The test results reveal that Jake has a rare blood disease and he will die within 3 days. The men offer Jake their protection under 2 non-negotiable conditions. He must give them all his money and do whatever they ask, including answering any questions. They give him 3 hours to decide, but Jake leaves without saying a word because he believes they are trying to trick him. The results he receives from the hospital are the same, but Jake thinks the lab has been paid off by Zach and Avi, so he seeks a second opinion from his private doctor, who gives him the same diagnosis. After threatening the doctor with a gun to ensure no one has bribed him, Jake admits he has no other choice. After withdrawing money from the bank, Jake returns to accept the men's deal. As they went for a walk, Avi explained that they were loan sharks, and it would be Jake's money they used for lending. After visiting their first client to deliver money, Avi asked Jake to recount his history with Matcha. Matcha once had 3 very foolish henchmen, known as the 3 Eddies. They lost their dealer before a big game and knew Jake was a good player, so they called him in as a replacement. Jake wanted to refuse, but they threatened Billy's family, forcing him to accept in order to protect them. During the game, the other players at the table began insulting Jake and his mother. Jake wouldn't stand for it, so he opened fire, the lights went out, the money vanished, and the next thing he knew, someone had ratted him out. Jake was interrogated by the police. To stop him from talking, they threatened his niece, and accidentally killed his sister-in-law when she tried to protect her daughter. Jake didn't tell the police that Matcha had organized the game, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. During that time, the 3 Eddies somehow angered Matcha, resulting in them being dealt with by Matcha like cement. After visiting several clients, Zach sent Jake to stay at an inn. Meanwhile, Matcha and Paul met with the crime boss Sam Gold, who was considered the ultimate role model that all other crime bosses aspired to follow. However, Gold never met with guests, so they met his advisor, Lily Walker, who agreed to broker a powder deal for Matcha. She also reminded him that Gold disliked attention and never gave second chances. Sometime later, Jake gave Zach and Avi more money before being asked about his time in prison. While playing chess with Avi, Jake recalled that he had 2 options, 14 years of regular imprisonment or 7 years in solitary confinement. So, he chose solitary confinement. His cell was located between 2 men. One was a chess master, and the other was a con artist who had been there for a long time. Though they never spoke directly, they knew everything about each other. And the first 5 years of his sentence, the 3 of them communicated by sending messages through library books, and that's how Jake learned the formula to win every game in the world. The 2 men had planned an escape and promised to take Jake with them. But when they finally fled, they disappeared without a word, leaving Jake behind. When Jake was released 2 years later, he discovered that those 2 men had taken all his money, leaving only a note that said, You can only get smarter by playing against a smarter opponent. So, Jake began using that formula to get rich at various casinos. As time passed, Jake continued working by meeting many clients and lending out his own money. He also had to threaten them if they didn't repay, but he couldn't bring himself to harm innocent, desperate people. Meanwhile, Avi and Zach were chaining a wall to a truck, and when they pulled, the wall broke, allowing them to steal a safe from the other side. That safe contained the powder Matcha had promised to Lily. When Matcha discovered he'd been robbed, he sent Paul to resolve the issue by any means necessary. Paul sought out their rival triad boss Lord John, who agreed to supply the powder for them temporarily, but at an exorbitant price. Jake, Zach, Avi and their team went to the hotel where the exchange was set to take place. They snuck into the room next to the thugs, drilled a hole in the wall, and pumped in anesthetic gas, putting both Matcha's and John's men to sleep. They then stole the money and the powder, staging the scene to make it look like Matcha had robbed John and vice versa. Sometime later, Jake received a call from Billy, who said he had asked around and discovered that Zach and Avi were so dangerous that even gold wouldn't dare mess with them, so Jake should get away. Jake didn't listen and continued working, where he was asked to shoot a terrified client. He refused and tried to shoot Avi, but realized the gun was empty before Avi knocked him out. Jake woke up hours later at the inn and received a call from Avi, who said he had survived the third day, so he should go get a checkup. After being visited by his niece and Billy, who left him a gun just in case, Jake went to see a doctor who confirmed that the initial diagnosis was wrong and that Jake was perfectly healthy. He tried to call Avi for answers, but Avi only told him that he would have to wait. Meanwhile, Paul gathered information and discovered Jake's name was linked to all the trouble his men had faced. So, Matcha ordered him to kill Jake. When Jake returned to the inn, Avi and Zach were waiting for him and warned him that Matcha's thugs were waiting inside the room. Jake ran, and the thugs chased him, but he managed to escape, especially when one of them slipped and accidentally shot himself. The other criminals found the body and assumed Jake had killed him. Jake went to meet Avi and Zach at their office, where they confessed they always knew Jake wasn't telling the full truth about the old deal with the Eddie group. Those three fools had been waiting for Jake when he got out of prison, intending to kill him for getting them fired by Matcha. To save his life, Jake offered the Eddies a deal. Each month he would give them 3% from any money they lent him. At first, only one of the Eddies accepted, but after seeing Jake keep his word, all of them wanted in, but this time at a 4% rate. In reality, Jake was paying each Eddie with the money of another Eddie, so he didn't lose anything at all. At some point, the Eddies ran out of money to lend, so they borrowed from Matcha, who quickly became interested in the mysterious man making money for the Eddie group. After gambling with the formula and making himself rich, Jake chose that time to go on vacation with his brother and niece, and that was when Matcha killed the Eddie group for not paying him back. Speaking of Matcha, he was having dinner at an upscale restaurant when his men arrived to report that Jake had escaped. Sorter noticed John's lover disguised as a waitress, so he shot her before leaving the restaurant to chase down her driver. However, his shooting skills were still poor, and he only wounded her instead of killing her. Before she died, she managed to shoot off Matcha's finger amidst the chaos. Later, Sorter was sent to John's hideout to kill him and his men. Back to Jake. He was still talking with Zach and Avi while they played golf on the rooftop. They explained that no one had ever met Gold because in truth he didn't exist. He was merely the embodiment of ego and greed. He only had power over those who believed in him. So, what Jake needed to do was change the rules about what he allowed to control him. After that, Jake withdrew all his remaining money from the bank and donated it all. He sneaked into Matcha's bedroom while struggling with the voices in his head, representing his ego. Jake apologized to Matcha for tricking him out of his money, admitted that Matcha was the better crime boss, and said he had made a donation in his name before leaving. To face his fears, Jake stepped into the elevator, but it got stuck on the 13th floor. While trying to overcome his panic, he had a conversation in his mind where he rejected his ego, finally stepping out of the game as a free man. When the elevator started working again, Jake reached the ground floor and saw Matcha waiting for him with a gun in hand. Consumed by his own ego, Matcha had become unhinged, but Jake remained calm and simply walked past him, which drove Matcha insane because he couldn't understand why someone wasn't afraid of him. He began to cry, realizing how deeply humiliated he had become. The next morning, Paul brought Matcha all the local newspapers, showing him that his name was splashed across the front pages. Jake hadn't lied when he said he donated in Matcha's name, and now everyone thought the casino boss cared about the community. Matcha was pleased to take the credit, but this joy was short-lived. Paul also informed him that Jake had the powder and was playing tricks on all of them. Paul, Sorter, and the rest of Matcha's goons went after Billy, who managed to hide his daughter in a closet when he realized one of his bodyguards had betrayed him. When they found him, Billy was beaten during the interrogation, and though he truthfully said he didn't know where Jake or the powder were, they didn't believe him. Paul's methods escalated, and Sauter began to feel uncomfortable, especially when they pulled the little girl out of the closet after hearing her cries. Unwilling to harm a child, Sauter rejected his own ego and started systematically killing his fellow henchmen. But he made a mistake at the end and was killed. Meanwhile, Matcha was visited by Lily. She brought him a wreath sent by Gold, who was displeased to see Matcha's name all over the newspapers since Gold disliked attention. Lily also informed him that Matcha's time was over and that he wouldn't get a second chance, sending him into another panic. Avi and Zach brought Jake and the powder to Matcha's casino, where Avi finally defeated Jake in a game of chess while confessing the final details of the story. He and Zach were the two men in the cells next to Jake's, and they had always wanted to take him with them. But Jake wasn't ready to accept the truth, implying they were just products of Jake's imagination. However, Jake didn't have time to process this because, at that moment, the casino guards came to take him to Matcha, who was holding the little girl by his side. After dropping the bag of powder on the floor, Jake told his niece that everything would be fine, which drove Matcha mad because Jake still didn't show any fear, even with a gun pointed at the child. The humiliation caused the ego voices in Matcha's head to conclude that Jake couldn't harm someone who was already dead, so Matcha pointed the gun at his own head and pulled the trigger. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.